All right, for number 25, it seems like we have a similar kind of question, except that it's not an absolute value function, but a quadratic. So what are you going to do with a quadratic? Okay, now, a lot of people would freak out in this case. When I was a kid, I think I would freak out too. So what would I do? What would I do is that, let me look at this. We have a quadratic, and there's a number 3 right here. So we're still asking the question, which part of the graph it's less than 3, okay? But now, what we will realize is that sometimes, especially when we deal with a quadratic, it is challenging to use a non-zero number to compare. Therefore, to make it easier for us to compare, we'll say, let's compare using the x-axis. Well, how do we do that? Well, let's make sure that one side is equal to 0 so that we have y equal to 0. So now we can simply try to plot it out and say, well, I think we can factor this part, and we can simply find out which part of the graph is below the x-axis. And if you try to factor this one, you would have 2x and x. You have 3 and 1. You have -3 and +1. 2x times 3, it's -6x, and then plus x, you have -5x. Yes, that would work. Okay, so you're like, oh, I know how to graph this quadratic since it's in factored form. You remember, we always love factored form. So we can make a graph with the factors. We know the roots, and we say, oh yeah, so it's gonna be a y-intercept of -3, and then we have a root at -1/2, and we have another root at 3. Let me move the -3 onto the left, and we can draw a little pretty graph right here. And we're asking a very simple question, and that is, which part of the quadratic is less than 0? And we say, well, it's very obvious. It's got to be this part, right? This part is less than 0. So the x values would have to be between -1/2 to 3, and we want to be less than 0, so we don't want it to equal to 0. So therefore, those two roots excluded from the solution set. That would be the interval notation. For the inequality notation, it would be -1/2 less than x less than 3. That would be the inequality notation. If you don't graph, if you don't want to, well, I don't know why you would not want to graph, but if you say you don't graph, then I would suggest you to do the more complicated method, which is to test out numbers, okay, test out these intervals. A lot more efforts for the same result. So I would say learn how to graph, live a good life. Okay.